Since the last post I made was rather depressing, here's a story that's a bit out of the norm for me, as most of what I have to tell about my mother and sister was pretty bad. But this one is a bit different. This is one of the few times my mother did anything good for me. In retrospect, it was mostly just Karen versus Karen, though. And had I not lived a life with this kind of mess in it, I wouldn't believe a lot of this myself, as this is pretty much stereotype galore. Aside from my mother being a real piece of work, the fact that a teacher was evil in this case still rather irks me. Teachers are supposed to be good people you can trust. And thankfully, I've only really had one bad teacher in the entire time I was in school. In elementary school, I dealt with a bully that we'll call Tina. She was big and strong for a girl her age and loved to throw it in the face of others. And she had a posse of kids that regularly followed her around. What's more, her aunt was one of the teachers at the school and was one of the teachers who stood watch during lunch period and out in the playground watching the kids during recess. So Tina got away with a lot of stuff because her aunt never stopped her. Tina's favorite thing to do was steal food from other kids in the cafeteria, especially desserts, and this made her a bit more heavyset, so she used her weight to get her way a lot. She loved to pick on kids she thought wouldn't fight back, but usually steered clear of any that were too big. There was a guy in my neighborhood that we'll call Troy. He was about 5 years older than me and took defensive martial arts. He showed me how to do a few moves in case I dealt with bullying. One move in particular was to crouch down and then jump up and hit your opponent in the chin to disorient them. But most of what Troy taught me was how to dodge. He showed me how to step out of the way anytime someone threw a punch or kick. He also showed me how to do some basic grapples and throws using momentum. I couldn't thank him enough for those skills, as they helped a time or two. Now, moving back to the bully Tina, she soon decided I was her next target one day at lunch when she tried to steal my chocolate pudding cup. I was bigger than her, so she typically left me alone. But I guess she somehow figured she'd test the waters and come after me next. She blatantly reached for my pudding cup and I just pushed her hand away. She tried again, and I refused to let her grab it. She tried to smack me, but I grabbed her arm and told her she better leave me alone, or it wouldn't end well for her. She literally snorted at me and said that she would just get her aunt to get me in trouble, but I showed no fear of that. So she moved in closer and goaded me by saying my witch sister would make a nice punching bag for her if I didn't cough up the pudding. I laughed and told her that if she laid one finger on my sister, she'd have to deal with both me and my crazy mother. And that would not end well for her. Tina blew me off and said she'd come back and deal with me later. Then, during recess, she snuck up on me by the tetherball and hit me over the head with her fist. That really hurt. But I did as Troy showed me and crouched down while Tina tried to wail on me. Then I jumped back up and hit her chin hard. I ran to stand right next to a nearby wall. As soon as she recovered enough, Tina ran right at me, charging like an angry rhino ready to do a running punch. I stepped out of the way and she ran fist first right into the wall. Tina screamed bloody murder and all the other kids that were with her pretty much scattered. So much for loyalty. Tina's aunt, a Karen, came running up and blowing a pea whistle so hard that it was sputtering. She tried to talk to Tina, but didn't get much out of her other than it was him. So Tina's aunt grabbed me by the arm and jerked me really hard out of sight and then actually put her hand on my throat to threaten me. The following is pretty paraphrased from what I remember as it was over 20 years ago, but I think it's pretty close. What have you done to my niece, you little jerk? I just defended myself. She then sees another teacher running towards us and lets go of me. Stay right there, you little brat. I'll deal with you later. She took care of Tina while the other teacher marched me to the principal's office. My dad was unable to get off work, so my mom was called. I dreaded this because I thought she'd never stick up for me, especially since it was a girl that I defended myself against. But then I had an idea that actually worked, though it was a gamble. As soon as my mom walked into the office, she looked mad. And the first thing she did was yell at me. She runs right to me while pointing a finger in my face. You got in a fight with a girl. Don't you have any manners? Boys don't hit girls. It's wrong. I tried my luck, so I said, but, Mom, she tried to steal from me. She beat me up, and she said she'd beat up my sister because I wouldn't let her take my food. What? She threatened my little princess. The office secretary shushed us both, and I did my best to explain the full story of what happened to my mom before we were ushered by the principal into his office. Tina's aunt soon met us there with a look like she wanted to murder someone on her face. She points at me with rage and says, "That little brat broke Tina's hand. She's on her way to the hospital right now because of him." But I only defended myself, and she hit the wall on her own. Mom then stands toe-to-toe with her and says, well, maybe she deserved that for making fun of my kid and threatening to hurt my little princess. Tina's aunt seemed shocked that someone actually stood up to her and was just as much of a Karen as herself. My mom then pokes her hard. "Now you listen here. It's Kragel's job to make sure that nothing happens to my little princess here at school. And if anyone here even lays a finger on her or him for it, then, so help me, I'll have them expelled or fired. Do you know who my husband is? He owns XYZ company, and he has connections all over, so you better back off." The principal then says, "Everyone calm down." Mom yells, "No, I will not calm down till there is justice here." This witch grabbed my son's throat just because he defended himself. "I want the cameras checked, and I want the police here now." The principal looked like a ball of stress. And Mom pulled out her cell phone and said that either he would call the police or she would. So he did. We waited in the main office for nearly 2 hours while police went through the camera footage. And it caught not only Tina's attack on me, but also her aunt putting her hand on my throat. She was marched out in handcuffs with her head down. After that, I told the principal about several other kids that Tina had been bullying, and he talked to all of them, and they told him about more kids. And those kids told him even more. By the following week, Tina had been expelled, and I was told that Tina's aunt was prosecuted for neglect and child abuse and was no longer allowed to work with children. I didn't see Tina again until we both ended up in the same high school. We didn't recognize each other at first till Tina heard my name at lunch. She stood up and walked right out of the cafeteria when I introduced myself. After that, she steered clear of me, but she gave me nasty looks whenever we were in the same classroom together. I didn't care. By this point, I had no fear of her, and she knew it. I'd put on some decent muscle from all the odd jobs I did regularly, and I think I intimidated her a bit. She didn't try to bully anyone anymore either. There was no one left to protect her if she did, and she had very few friends. When I got my car at 16, though, I got to see her jaw drop as I drove away from school the first day I'd driven it there. I just gave her a wave and kept on going. By the following school year, she didn't come back, and I haven't seen her since. I enjoy reading your stories, and recently I got one of my own, which I think you'll enjoy as well. Let me preface by saying this is not in the US, but a smaller country in Europe, so a company our size is pretty big. Well, on to the story. I work for said pretty big engineering company with around 2,500 employees spread around the world. The main part of us, I guess around 2K, works in our home country, with the main bulk stationed in 4 big offices. Besides the big offices, there's also some smaller ones scattered around the country. I work in one of those. In total, we're 18 people employed at our office. This is obviously not enough people to warrant a reception desk, canteen, IT department, and so on. That means we get on by ourselves for the most part, unless it's a bigger problem we can't solve, in which case we have to call one of the main offices for help. It's a bit slower sometimes, but it's okay, and we don't make a fuss. This also means that there's some differences in how stuff is done in different places. For example, in our office, the office tasks, ordering paper, organizing the storage area, arranging office get-togethers and stuff like that, are just something we all do to make things run. None of us mind, as it's just small stuff that doesn't take a lot of time. In the bigger offices, there's people employed to handle all that stuff. Well, one of our company perks is that every Friday, we get a 30 minutes break of paid breakfast in the office. In the bigger offices, there's a canteen where they arrange the breakfast so the employees just have to waltz down, eat, and go back to work. In our office, we take turns going to the nearest bakery and buying breakfast, then go to a grocery store and get stuff to put on the bread, all in our own time, before coming in. We'll get the breakfast reimbursed, but not the time. Again, we didn't mind the arrangement, and neither did the facility manager stationed in the main offices. What they suddenly did have a problem with is that we have a habit of buying some morning cakes, cinnamon buns, or whatever we felt like having that day. Might sound weird, but it's a tradition where I am from, and it's delicious to go with the breakfast. One day, my boss got an email from them with a list of what the breakfast could contain, and nothing else, and also a budget for each person because it had to be equal for all offices. That meant we couldn't get our cakes anymore, and neither cold cuts of meat for our bread, both because it wasn't on the list and because we often went a little bit over budget. The office was in uproar. Don't mess with an engineer's breakfast. So we comply and only buy the stuff we're allowed to. But we hatch out a plan. If they want it all to be equal, all will have to be equal, which means all of us start putting 30 minutes each Friday on the company as we are entitled to. Before, we often just put a smaller amount of time down, or we just didn't, and the time disappeared to other tasks, which the company could bill to clients. 18 times 30 minutes equal 9 hours each week of lost time, already a lot more than what the breakfast cost extra. We ask for somewhere and someone to get us breakfast and such, as the other offices didn't have to do it themselves and it had to be equal. We make a list of other stuff we don't have that the other offices do. We named every small thing we could come up with, including, but not limited to, IT department, receptionist, kitchen worker to help collect and make the breakfast, facility worker to keep warehouse stocked up, fancy coffee machine. What we had was an old-school regular coffee maker. Other offices had fancy automatic ones with different blends and stuff. I think around 15, 20 bullet points of varying pettiness. My boss sends the list to the main office and tells them we need this for all things to be equal, as you wanted. Well, we now have a fancy coffee machine costing around $8,000 to get installed because a new water line had to be drawn to where it's placed, and a much bigger maintenance cost because of different blends, cleaning, and so on. Meanwhile, we're all waiting for our IT department to get set up, but I'm guessing we'll get our cakes back before that happens.